Hello. So today's lesson is the extract from the Prelude. We kind of call this part stealing a boat because essentially that's what it's about. It's someone stealing a boat. Now, this is possibly the most challenging one we've done so far, but kind of keep an open mind. Hopefully by the end of the video and when you've done the task, we should be up to speed on this poem. So just to start off with, I just want to recap these words because when analysing this poem, we could try and just allude to these words and it can enhance your answer a little bit more. So the sublime, if you can remember, was kind of being overwhelmed by a sight to a point that you thought was impossible, kind of like a mind-changing or life-changing experience brought on by kind of a view of nature that really takes you in. And then the next one was pantheism, so the belief that the universe and all the natural things is God, so almost like God is in everything around us. And I'll speak about these a little bit more when we actually go into the poem. But first, what I want you to do is pause, read the poem, and think about what it's about. So it's really important you do this before you move on with the video. I just want you to kind of have a read. It's fairly easy to understand on the surface, and just see if you can kind of work out what's going on, almost the story of this poem, essentially. And then you can resume the video. All right, so hopefully now you've done that, you've had a look, and you've probably been able to work out that it is literally someone taking a boat, and then they return. So just to kind of fill in the gaps if you didn't quite get it, and like I say, this poem can seem pretty bonkers, but if you stick through it, and I'll just kind of go through what has actually happened. So, I mean, the poem is from Wordsworth's perspective as a child, so he's reflecting on this childhood memory of when he was in the Lake District and he stole a boat. And so hopefully what you'll have noticed is that, let's say he's here, he's taken the boat from the tree, and he's took it out onto the lake. Apologies that my artistic designs are quite limited, but this is a lake. And so what you'll have seen is that basically he takes this boat and he starts rowing on the lake. And when you're rowing, so Wordsworth would be sat in this boat here and he would be facing this way, okay, but traveling in this direction. So that's what he means when he's saying he's picking a spot to focus on, and he focuses on this craggy ridge, and that means he will go in the right direction when he's rowing. So at this point, this is as far as he can see. If you imagine his eye line here, and he thinks that this is kind of the top of the highest point that he's going to see. And he says above this he can only see the stars. So he's here, he can see this craggy ridge, and then he thinks that is the highest point of the mountain, or what he's looking at. So as he then travels further out into the lake, and you'll have noticed a kind of tone shift halfway down the poem when he notices. So let's say he gets to this point, and now what he can see is he's come further. He can see this other kind of mountain towering over. So what he thought was the highest point, it turns out it's actually not. And so this is where he has this, and I'll explain it in further detail when we look at the poem, but he has this kind of experience where it overwhelms him. And I think the poem is kind of all about realizing how insignificant we are, or how insignificant man is, and how powerful nature is. And so I mean, it sounds pretty bonkers, especially when he starts to say he felt like this mountain was chasing him. But let's go with it. And as we go through the language and the structure, we'll hopefully kind of see what he means by this. Okay, so that's just to summarize the action in the poem. He steals a boat. He can only see this far. He rows a bit more. He sees this. It kind of scares him. It frightens him. He has this kind of life-changing experience, and then he rows back and goes home, and he's kind of troubled by this for days. So that's the story of the poem. And obviously he was a romantic poet, so if you remember from the last lesson, nature was a huge theme that they would discuss, and so as we go into the poem, we'll see a little bit more about that. Okay, so what you'll notice is, if we just go back, what you notice is one big stanza. Okay, it's just one long verse. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we go along. I've kind of, just for the sake of this, I've split it up into 3 different sections. But annotate along with me on your own copy, and hopefully this will start to make sense as we go through. So, one summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree. So you need to think about who is the her. And I think as we read the poem, we kind of start to imagine that this is nature. He was led there by nature. It's almost as if nature wanted him to have this experience to do. So he's personifying nature there. Within a rocky cove, its usual home, straight I unloosed her chain and stepping in pushed from the shore. So you notice, and as with most romantic poems, they use normal kind of everyday language. So it's pretty easy to understand that he's taking this chain off the boat, and he is pushing it from the shore. He's getting into the lake. Okay. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. So here, an act of stealth, troubled pleasure. He's enjoying it, but he knows it's wrong. Okay, and the act of stealth kind of suggests this childlike sneakiness. And again, we talked about kind of how the Romantics talked about the innocence of youth and how important that was, to be able to be open-minded. So he's just kind of channeling this his childlike self as he's looking back on this memory that he had of stealing this boat. So he's enjoying it at this point. We can see it's troubled pleasure. Nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. So again, he's just describing kind of what you can see, the reflection on the water. It's this imagery of kind of how beautiful these surroundings were. But now, like one who rows, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fix my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge. Okay, so this is what I was talking about a minute ago. What we can see is he's proud of his skill. All right, and I think this kind of links to the idea of being arrogant, or the arrogance of man as a whole. All right, as humans, we feel like we can kind of take everything and everything is ours. And I think this poem kind of goes against the idea that we shouldn't have that point of view. So to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line is basically saying what I said earlier. He's looking at the top of this craggy ridge, and then that'll allow him to row straight. Okay, so and what he said about the craggy ridge is that that's the horizon's utmost boundary. Okay, far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. That's what I was talking about before. It is the absolute top. Okay, so above this This ridge, all right, is just the sky, the stars in the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Okay, so this is a pinnace in this top corner. So obviously there might be some kind of childlike imagination going on here. I mean, a pinnace is a small boat. Obviously it's going to be a lot bigger than this rowing boat that he's stolen. So is this kind of him being on a childlike adventure, taking this boat, and he's imagining that this boat's bigger than it is. And then elfin as well. Again, elfin can mean small. Okay, it could literally just be describing the boat. But also, if you think of elves, we could have these magical connotations as well, like he's having this really good time. Lustily, I dipped my oars into the silent lake. Okay, so again, it's just describing in everyday language what he's doing. I feel like we could kind of point out that he's doing what he wants. Remember, he's not supposed to be here. This is not his boat. And again, it's kind of that idea of man just taking whatever they want. And as he's dipping his oars into the silent lake, he's disturbing that peace. All right, he shouldn't actually be there. So he's disturbing this peaceful surroundings. And as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. So again, we've got a simile here. The boat's going through like a swan. Obviously, we've got this natural image of a swan doing what it does, swimming on the water. But this boat is a man-made item, isn't it? So it contrasts with the nature there as well. Almost like, again, it shouldn't be there. The lake should be for the swans, the wildlife, and things like that. And then this is where we see the change. Okay, so he's just describing, he's having this great time, he's stealing this boat, he's probably got all this adrenaline. And then when from behind that craggy steep till then the horizon's bound, so up until that point, the craggy steep was the highest point that you could see. A huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. Okay, so this is when he sees the bigger part of this peak. And what we could see there, if we look at the language, a huge peak, black and huge. He repeats his word in it's very simple, huge, simple adjectives, huge, black, huge. Okay, obviously as a poet, we would imagine some more creative language perhaps, but obviously we think Wordsworth's doing this on purpose. It's almost like he's lost for words. This experience has taken so much out of him that he can just use his basic vocabulary. And as you can see, it's kind of personifying this thing again, upreared its head as well, which again kind of adds to the power of nature. I've put here that it's kind of ominous. It's like a disturbed monster, upreared its head. It's like something's been awoken and it's kind of coming to get him. And he responds with panic. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own and measured motion, like a living thing, strode after me. So yeah, and again, I know it sounds ridiculous at this point, but he feels like this peak is kind of chasing him, coming after him. He's so powerful, and it's almost at this point he's kind of reevaluating everything in his life. And like I say, this part of the prelude is him as a child. He's growing up. He's taking on a new kind of more mature adult personality. and it's almost like this point, this specific event has kind of changed his outlook. With trembling oars I turned, and again, sorry, just before I go on to that, yeah, there's the link to pantheism is in there. So he feels like it's almost like if we imagine God is everywhere in everything that's nature, is perhaps God judging him for this, or is nature kind of judging him for the decisions he's made in terms of kind of stealing this boat, taking what's his? And so I think that's important in terms of, if you think about Wordsworth, if not a pantheist, definitely sharing some of the views of pantheism, is definitely kind of making this point here that we need to kind of have respect. All right? Otherwise, nature will judge us and punish us. And with trembling oars I turned. And so again, you can see here before we've got, I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and we've got this real kind of peaceful situation going on. And then now we've got trembling oars. All right, the power of nature, just seeing this view has kind of changed his whole personality, his whole mindset. And now those oars are trembling as he's trying to get back to the shore. There in her mooring place, I left my bark. And again, so we've gone from this boat being an elfin pinnace in his head, and now it's just bark. All right, it's like he's downgraded it, and that maybe that childlike imagination has gone. And perhaps we could say that this poem is kind of about growing up and maturing and realizing what's important in the world. And through the meadows homeward went in grave and serious mood. Okay, so he's basically just gone home in a very sad and serious mood. But after I had seen that spectacle, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. And so again, here, this is where we can kind of talk about the sublime, and what we said about that was where you kind of experience something that you thought was impossible. And so this sight that he's had has had such a life-changing impact on him, and he's almost just realized that man and himself is insignificant compared to nature and the powers that nature have. And then as we go down, it kind of, there's a lot of repetition here. It says, of unknown modes of being, over my thoughts there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields. It's almost like he's looking back on what he's lost now. Now he's had this experience. Everything's changed for him, and it's very disconcerting for him. But huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men move slowly through the mind by day, and were trouble to my dreams. So again, this idea of we often think of the sublime as a positive experience, but it could also be the opposite, and we could also be terrified and maybe put into a bit of a somber mood when we realize that actually the world is not ours and we are fairly insignificant. So I'm hoping that section has kind of cleared a few things up for you, and at least now we've got a sense of what's going on in the poem and the effect that it had on Wordsworth as a child, this experience. So we looked a little bit at language. So if we look at structure, I mean, the first thing you can see as we look on the left, it is all one verse. It's one huge stanza. And I suppose what we could say about that is that it's overwhelming. All right, we look at that poem and we're almost overwhelmed when I first told you to read it. Think back to what your first thoughts were when you first looked at it all on that one page and thought, my God, that's a long poem. And so it can be quite overwhelming at first. So, I mean, if we were going to put that into some sort of sentence that we could include in a response to this, you could say something like, Wordsworth may have decided to structure this extract as one long verse to reflect the impression he got when seeing the peak. When we first look at the poem, it could give us a sense of being overwhelmed by the size of it, just as Wordsworth as a child felt as he had this experience. So we're just taking something from the poem, just the structure of it, and then we're turning it into a response of why Wordsworth may have made this choice. So that's something you could say basic, but if you want to go a little bit further, you'll notice, if you think back to when we studied Macbeth, you all loved iambic pentameter, you all understood it straight away. But just for a quick recap, that is when we've got the 10 syllables in each line, to keep it simple. That kind of rhythm. So as you can see, one summer evening led by her I found a little boat tied to a willow tree. All right, and I mean, it's not completely strict all the way through, but each line does have 10 syllables until we get to this one. And so this line stands out. If you try and count the syllables in iambic pentameter, the horizon's utmost boundary far up, it just doesn't work. Okay, so then we think about, right, why would Wordsworth break that rhythm for this line? So we look at the significance of the line, and it's talking about the horizon's utmost boundary far above. And so if we think about the point of the poem and the point of kind of romanticism and wanting a change in outlook for people, he's talking about horizons and boundaries, and he's breaking his own boundary here, his iambic pentameter here. And so again, we could maybe discuss that in terms of how we should be breaking boundaries. This person's had this kind of epiphany where his kind of whole outlook on life has changed, and so maybe this could be kind of a message to us as readers about breaking boundaries as well. So if that didn't make too much sense straight away, again, I've put it into a little paragraph that again you could include in your responses. So Wordsworth structures this extract in fairly strict iambic pentameter. However, the most notable break of this is in the horizon's utmost boundary far above, which is 11 or 12 syllables. That's depending on how you're pronouncing boundary. Could this have been done on purpose? And I've put a question in there, and that's absolutely fine when you're writing as well. Like I said, like we always say, you're not looking for a specific point, or you're not looking for a right answer. Okay, you're just discussing with yourself essentially. It's interesting to note that it's on this line where he discusses horizons and boundaries. The whole poem appears to be about breaking boundaries and finding new horizons, a realization that everything you thought about the world has been wrong. Therefore, through this line, breaking the boundary of iambic pentameter, Wordsworth could be suggesting that we review the way we feel about the world. Okay, so again, a couple of structure points to help you, so you're not just looking at language. And the reason for that is because language in this poem, I think what students mostly struggle with when looking at this poem is what to pick out. I think most of the other poems have easy little sections that you can commit to memory. You think about the effect, you know it, and you can whack it in there in your exam. For this one, it's a little bit difficult. So I've just picked out a couple of quotations for you to try and commit to memory here. So for example, one summer evening led by her should be something that's quite easy to remember. You've got the brackets here as well. It's making a note that this wasn't a conscious decision by Wordsworth. He was kind of led by nature. Nature wanted him to have this experience. And again, you link that quotation to other things to do with the power of nature as well, and how ultimately nature has all control. And the next one, then, it was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. So again, we can talk about the fact that he knew this was wrong, all right, but he ended up doing it anyway because it felt good. And again, we could look at that as kind of a comment on humanity itself, and people doing whatever they want for good reasons. And actually, it turns out that we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't be so selfish, and we should kind of have this respect as well. The huge peak, black and huge, would probably be a good one to commit to memory. It's quite easy to remember, and again, it's got that message of being absolutely kind of overwhelmed, and him having this kind of sublime experience that kind of makes him change his views. And then I couldn't really pick a specific one out of the bottom, but these quotes kind of sum up the whole poem. You've got a bit for each point of the poem, which again you could link to a structural point, but just something from here that kind of shows the effects of how Wordsworth as a child kind of lived with and dealt with this experience afterwards. Perhaps the repetition of no you could pick out, which kind of shows that almost everything has changed for him. Okay, so on the right here, you've got the mark scheme. Obviously, your section B question would be out of 30 marks. If you're hitting kind of the top of this bit, level 3, probably looking at grade 4, which I'm sure each and every one of you are capable of, and you've kind of shown that over the last few lessons as well. And if we're pushing kind of further, we need to go into this idea of having a clear understanding of the ideas and the contextual factors, rather than just some understanding. So this is why I've kind of trying to drill into these points about romanticism, pantheism, sublime. You don't have to base your whole response around those things, but just little droplets of those kind of terms and being able to handle them well will definitely make the examiner think, right, okay, I'm moving this from level 3 up into level 4. And again, the same with the methods as well. If you can make a structural point about the methods, and really kind of tackle the what we've discussed here in a more detailed way, then again we'll be pushing up into this AO2 of level 4 as well. So the idea is to just make sure you drop in these things in subtly, just to make sure we're pushing up into those grade 5s and hopefully grade 6s as well. So I'm going to leave it there, but your task for today is we're just going to step back a little bit and we're going to do an unseen style response. So your section C stuff that we did before Easter. So how does Wordsworth present ideas about nature in the Prelude? So this is just so you can kind of take everything I've said in your own thoughts and kind of put them to paper. So I will send this document out again, which kind of suggests how you construct an unseen poetry response. And again, we do the comparative paragraphs pretty similarly as well. So it's going to help you with your section C and your section B responses anyway. So again, if you've lost this document, I will send that one out again to you, so you can kind of use this to help you do this task. So just here, just to note, try and include at least 3 detailed paragraphs, all right, each exploring a different method. Try and include these three terms as well. Okay. And like I say, your whole response doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't just be about romanticism and the context around it, but just these little droplets here and there would help. And try and ensure one of your methods is a point about structure. So go back to the points I made about structure as well, and try and make at least one paragraph exploring that as well. So you've got a mixture of structure and language. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Any questions, just send me an email. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Enjoy.